Nothing should affect Mrs. Angelini. Nothing should be done to embarrass this poor woman who is Lord Advocate of Scotland. No matter what she's done, no matter how many children have been abused and raped at this present time, the Lord Advocate of Scotland does not want to be embarrassed because she's involved in it. And the Scottish Government are colluding in this disgraceful conduct. Now, what we've been doing since the 4th of December was to keep more pressure on, and fortunately some of the media in Scotland, like the Firm and the Press and Journal in Aberdeen, have been very good in putting information out. Now, on the 17th of November, the Firm put in a strong story attacking Angelini's involvement. Of course, they got the paperwork that we provided for them, and they very courageously went in, and they were the first real people in Scotland to really do so in a big way, to attack Angelini. Immediately, a team was sent from Angelini's office at the Crown Office, more or less threatening to put the Firm out of business unless they get a retraction and an apology straight away. The Firm did this, but it was under the most severe duress. I think if they'd stood their ground, any court action would never have. It was a big bluff. But it's all right for me to say that. The Firm has 40 employees. They were on the spot at the time, and I can understand why they perhaps made that concession at the time. But they know as well as we do that Angelini and the rest of them have been up to no good. Now, the other thing that we discovered a little bit later on was that Mrs. Angelini had secretly been using a private law firm to do this. A law firm, an Edinburgh law firm, a very eminent firm in Scotland called Levy and McRae. And the person responsible for this was the senior partner in Levy and McRae, a man called Peter Watson. Now, I contacted Mr. Watson when I discovered this information, which he thought was top secret. And I said to him, Mr. Watson, would you tell me first if you've actually been dealing with, on behalf of Mrs. Angelini? And if so, is Mrs. Angelini paying your fees, which we have no quarrel with if that's the case, or is it being paid by the Scottish taxpayer? Is it being purloined from public funds, which is a totally different reason indeed. If the Lord Advocate has been perverting the course of justice, and now she is using public money to conceal the facts of the story from the Scottish public, that is a serious matter and a criminal matter. Mr. Watson got very embarrassed, sent a rather offensive email back to me saying, who the hell are you, type of thing, why should I talk to you? And I just said, well, it's up to you, Mr. Watson, you can answer the question or you can't. Anyway, he still refused to answer it. We do have a document, which I haven't got with me, and it's a kind of a privileged one at the moment, but we have a document to show that yes, he was, and he threatened one of the information providers with defamation if they mention anything more about Angelini's involvement in this case. We also know that he sent general threats to every editor in Scotland, saying that they would be most severely dealt with if any of them ever mentioned Mrs. Angelini's connection in any way with the Hollie Greig case. So we have a high-level attempt to intimidate the press of Scotland, the media of Scotland, and the whole of the UK, because Google have been threatened as well. Now, I'm going to go back with one other item, one very sinister item, because at the moment we are using everything we can, the documentation, to actually bring the people to justice. It's a hard job when you've got the police, the judiciary, and the politicians who are in power in Scotland at the moment, all against you, who don't want to stop this case, who want to stop this case going ahead, despite the overwhelming weight of evidence. I'm absolutely sure if it was Angus and Aggie who got the chip shop in Gorbals, they'd have been banged up in jail years ago. But because it's Sheriff Buchanan, because Angelini is involved, everything has to be blocked. And police officers, because not only is police officer Terry Major involved, but two other police officers, Leanne Davidson, which we know, and Innes Walker, who wrote that letter, who is now a chief inspector, have also served to pervert the course of justice in this case. So it's a very bad thing, and lots of people are going to go down when it finally comes to light. I'm determined that it will come to light in due course by one means or another. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And I think when the BBC said this is a story that will go around the world, the worst they had ever heard, I don't think they were too far wrong, although there are some really horrific stories about that I've heard about as well, which compare with it in many, many ways, but it is horrifying. Now, there's another side to this story as well, and a very sinister side to the story, but I will go back in time on this. I'm going to go back to 1997. Now, Anne Greig, when she was 11 years old, her father died. And her elder brother, who was 6 years older, called Robert, who was known as Roy in the family, was a very good young man, a very honourable young man, and he decided he would take the responsibility for looking after his younger sister and his widowed mother. And so that was the case, so he looked after them as best he could. When Anne had children, Roy was also a wonderful uncle to the two children, to Greig, and especially to Hollie, because of her problem of having Down syndrome. And he worked very hard, he was devoted to her, he gave lots of time to her, he used to work very hard for charities to raise funds for Down syndrome victims, and he was just marvellous in that way. He never married, he was a bachelor, but he was a bar manager, he was very popular, he used to like to play golf, he liked sports, he liked to read, he enjoyed company, having a chat with all the lads and all the rest of it. He was just a really straightforward chap that we know plenty of people like that. He was one of those people, and devoted to his family. On the 17th of November 1997, on a lonely road just outside Aberdeen, just to the north of the city, Roy Greig's body was found in a burning car. At the time, of course this was 1997, remember 3 years before Hollie had given all the information about the abusers, no one really knew what had happened. Anne said the family couldn't understand. He was he had no history of depression or mental problems or anything like that. He was a pleasant, well-liked person. He had no known financial problems, no health problems, no problems with relationships. He was just a straightforward, happy guy who enjoyed his life. Why would he be found on his own in a burnt-out car? The pathologist was a man called Dr. James Grieve, who I spoke to recently, who conducted the autopsy, and he decided that the autopsy should, and the cause leading to the cause of death, should be death by smoke inhalation. The other doctor who performed the autopsy was a lady doctor, Dawn Marie Chalmers, who I've now discovered is Dawn Marie Kelsey, and is practicing as a GP in Aberdeen. I have to say, since speaking to Dr. Grieve, I've also tried to speak to Dr. Kelsey, but she has disappeared. And even the people in the surgery in Old Aberdeen do not know what's happened to her. She's disappeared off the face of the earth. Once I wanted to talk to her. Very odd. We've also discovered today that Dr. Grieve is actually a Crown Office pathologist. And when we had we didn't know this at the time, but when I interviewed him, he got very nervous, and he said, near the end of it, he says, "It sounds as if you're trying to implicate me with all this." And I said, "With all what?" He said, "Well, whatever you're talking about." And I said, "Well, we're not trying to implicate anybody." I said, "We just want the truth." I said, "If you acted honestly, then there's no problem. But I will tell you, Dr. Grieve, and you're an expert, but let me tell you this, because I've been doing a little research myself, although I know nothing about these things, but I have talked about people who do know what they're talking about. And one of the first things that they have said is that it's very, very, what we should say is it was described as an unexplained death, but probably suicide. That was how everybody was led to believe it was going to be. It was a suicide. I said, first of all, I said, I do understand that it's very rare for anyone to commit suicide by setting fire to themselves. It's too painful. Sometimes happens in political demonstrations, or people who've got a previous history of being very disturbed. But that didn't apply to Roy. You must accept it's very rare for people to kill themselves in that way. It is just so awful and painful and unpleasant, as I'm sure we can all imagine.